Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we finally have our first review of an RX 5700 XT partner card, and this one comes courtesy of MSI with their new Evoke OC. And if you're wondering what an Evoke graphics card is, well, apparently it's a gold encased graphics card that, yeah. So not quite sure what's going on with the design styling here, but whatever, it's not too important. The exciting part is we have our first AIB 5700 XT. So very keen to see what it can do. I won't be starting off with a 30 plus game benchmark. We do have one of those planned, and yeah, that'll be on the channel soon. For this one, I'm just going to do a pretty standard graphics card review. So the focus will be on first the design, then we'll very briefly touch on FPS performance before diving into things like operating temperatures, power consumption, and overclocking. Right, so design-wise, it's gold. You've probably got that at this point. Color choice aside though, it is quite a nice looking card, and I like that aluminium backplate that sort of wraps around a bit to the side there. And the aluminium cover on the front side gives the fan shroud a really nice premium look and feel. The only visible plastic beside the fans are the triangle cutout bits found on the end and side of the card, and they look pretty neat as well. Overall, it is a very sleek looking card, and there is no RGB lighting. In terms of dimensions, the card measures 235mm long, making it reasonably compact, at least lengthwise. It does stand 115mm tall and is rather wide at 50mm. So kind of compact, but kind of not compact at the same time, depending on your constraints if you're building in an ITX rig. It's not super heavy though, tipping the scales at 890 grams. There are certainly much heavier models, and we'll be looking at one of those very soon. Then over on the I/O panel, there are 3 display ports and a single HDMI port, so a pretty standard configuration there. As for the power input, MSI has gone with a 6 plus 8 pin configuration, so that'll provide ample power for the RX 5700 XT. Now, pulling the cooler off isn't overly difficult, but it has been made a little tedious through the use of some double-sided adhesive for that little plastic bit on the side. It is quite difficult to tear off. Of course, MSI hasn't designed the card to be pulled apart, but if you have to, the adhesive will cause you some headaches. Anyway, with the cooler removed, we find a single heatsink that's designed to cool not just the GPU, but also the VRM and GDDR6 memory. An aluminium base plate is used to extract heat from the VRM and memory components, while the GPU gets a nickel-plated copper insert, which then connects to 4 heat pipes. It's not an overly big heatsink, I have to say, and all up it weighs just 355 grams. The fans with their plastic shroud, for example, with the little aluminium cover that goes over the top, well, they weigh an additional 222 grams. Moving on, we have the PCB, which is considerably shorter than the reference version, but other than that, it is fairly similar. For example, we get the same 7-phase VRM for the GPU, so not much more to go over here really. So that's the Evoke pretty much inside and out. It's really now time to put it on the test system and see how it performs. And please note, all testing was completed before tearing the card down, so that hasn't impacted our thermal results or anything like that. Running F1 2019 on a loop for an hour, we find that the Evoke OC heated up to just 69 degrees in a 21 degree room inside the Corsair Crystal 570X, which is fully populated with 120mm fans. The good news here being that's a huge 15 degree drop in peak operating temperature from the AMD reference card, which peaked at 84 degrees under the exact same conditions. At this temperature, the Evoke OC maintained an average core clock frequency of roughly 1850 MHz, and there is quite a lot of variance in the clock speed with these 5700 series GPUs, but the lower operating temperature generally saw the MSI model run around 50 MHz faster than AMD's reference model. The twin axial fans spun at the same 2000 to 2100 RPM as the blower fan found on the reference model, but subjectively they were slightly quieter and really couldn't be heard over the Corsair ML case fans, which themselves are very quiet. As for the GDDR6 memory temp, that was only reduced by 4 degrees, and the VRM temperatures were really much the same. When it came to power consumption, the Evoke OC is a little more power hungry than the reference model. It seems although that extra 50 MHz will cost you around 20 watts of GPU power, but even at just over 200 watts, the 5700 XT isn't exactly a power pig given the performance. Now, something we couldn't do with the AMD reference model, unless we cranked the blower fan right up to ear bleeding levels, was overclock. There is still a voltage cap, 1200 millivolts, and a frequency cap of 2150 MHz with the Evoke OC, as AMD imposes these limits at the BIOS level. But at least you can hit these caps now without the graphics card sounding like a jet engine. With the limits reached, MSI's Afterburner utility saw a peak operating temperature of 70 degrees, but in order to achieve that temperature, the fan was now spinning at 2400 RPM, where you could just hear it. Not exactly loud, but I could just hear the graphics card over the case fans now, which is similar to what I found with the AMD reference card. Also, although we're targeting 2150 MHz, the card maintained a clock speed of around 2 GHz, so that's only a mere 8% increase in frequency from the stock configuration. Meanwhile, the GDDR6 memory, well, that still doesn't really respond to overclocking. We got another 25 MHz out of it, so it's barely worth mentioning. So with that, let's move on to some benchmark graphs. As usual, we're using our Core i9 9900K GPU test rig, and for this one, the CPU has been overclocked to 5 GHz, and then we have 16 GB of DDR4 3400 memory. The latest drivers available at the time of testing have been used, and as I mentioned earlier, we have just a few select games to look at. Out of the box, the Evoke OC matched the AMD reference 5700 XT exactly. Same performance, just cooler and quieter. Meanwhile, that 8% increase in frequency boosted the average frame rate by a mere 3%, so nothing to see here, folks. Again, we see the exact same performance from the Evoke OC to that of the reference card in Forza Horizon 4, and overclocking only boosted frame rates by 2%. Also, for those not up to speed, yes, the results are correct. The RDNA GPUs absolutely kill it in Forza Horizon 4, but sadly this isn't representative of performance in general. Here we see more typical 5700 XT performance in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Again, the Evoke OC matched the reference model, but this time the overclock did boost performance by 5%, but again, nothing to get too excited about. As we saw when looking at the thermal performance and operating frequencies earlier, the Evoke OC pushes GPU consumption up over 200 watts, and that's a 10% increase in power consumption for no extra performance. Then our manual overclock increases consumption by a further 10% for up to a 5% boost in performance. Then when taking the entire system, so total system consumption, into account, the gains are less extreme. But even so, whereas the reference model was only slightly more power hungry than the 2070 Super, the Evoke OC pushes past the RTX 2080. Still, overall, not a bad result. So there you have it, the new Evoke OC from MSI. It is a neat little graphics card. I just wish it came in silver rather than gold, but that's a personal preference thing, and maybe a lot of you guys prefer the gold look. Not sure on that one. Anyway, there is a non-OC version as well. It's also gold. That one's known simply as the Evoke, and MSI claim a 40 MHz difference in the boost clock. So in other words, pretty much the same product. I can't imagine there's going to be too much difference on average. Therefore, if the standard Evoke is, say, $20 cheaper than the Evoke OC, I'd just get that model. Unfortunately though, right now I don't know how much either model will cost, as MSI aren't releasing that information. Rather, they say we'll find this out on Friday when they go on sale. So that's helpful, you know, for people reviewing them, so you know whether or not to buy one. And to think I signed an NDA for this shit. So I reached out to some local retailers, and it sounds like the Evoke is going to be a pretty pricey item, costing around $730 Aussie, while the mech will only cost $630 Aussie. And for those of you unfamiliar with Australian pricing, for reference, the cheapest AMD blower models sell for $650, so that makes the mech a rather good buy. And it also sounds like the mech will meet the $400 US MSRP, while the Evoke could be more like $450 to $700 US, which I have to say won't be great if true. I'm really hoping it's more like $420 to $430 US, but that could be wishful thinking. Anyway, we'll have to revisit that subject at a later date once we have retail pricing. As for performance, well, I'm not at all surprised by what we found. I was expecting the AIB models to be very similar to the AMD reference blower version, and at best I thought maybe we'd see a 3 to 4% performance boost, which really is nothing. So what I was really hoping for was a big reduction in operating volume and temperature. The Evoke OC is definitely quieter, which is nice, and it's much cooler as well. And this means where I was quite hesitant to recommend AMD's blower model, I can comfortably recommend the Evoke OC. assuming the pricing's where we want it to be, and that would make it a great mid-range offering, assuming you can stomach the bling. And I think I'll wrap this review up here. I had planned to break things down a little better than I did, but without official pricing information, there's really not much more to be said. I'll be doing my absolute best to get every single 5700 XT graphics card that I can in for review. Sadly, we have already missed out on the Sapphire Nitro model. Those guys don't seem to send samples down under, which is a real shame. The last sample Sapphire sent me directly was an R9 290, and I purchased one of their RX 460s myself. So come on, Sapphire, pull your finger out. We have over 1 million US viewers each month. We're not just an Aussie channel, so yeah, maybe send us a sample again. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, like button. If you want to subscribe for more content, subscribe button. And most of all, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve. I'll see you again next time.